Hi, everybody. This is attorney Andy Marcantel and attorney Mark J. Victor, and we are the Attorneys for Freedom from the Attorneys for Freedom Law Firm. We have offices in Arizona, we have offices in Hawaii, and we also practice nationwide in federal court and pro hoc vice all over the United States of America. And we do lots of use of force cases, don't we, Mark?
Been doing them for almost 30 years, Andy.
Yeah. So let's talk about this big video that's going around on the internet right now. You want to kind of give a summary of it?
Yeah, so this video is kicking around. It's actually an incident that fairly recently occurred. It was back on March 3rd of 2022, happened in San Diego. And sheriff's deputy from San Diego shows up. Very routine situation. He's going to serve a woman who is apparently renting a condo or an apartment of some sorts with an eviction notice. Just a notice that says, hey, look, you haven't paid your rent or you're in breach of your lease or something like that. And here's your notice that you're going to be kicked out of your place. Fairly routine, and sheriff's deputies do this all the time. And so, he shows up at the place and really looks like he's certainly not excited at the beginning. I think he's very cool, calm, collected, no problems there at all. Knocks on the door, identifies the woman whose name is Yun Lee, and establishes who she is right at the beginning. Says, hey, I got a notice for you. And then he notices something.
He notices what appears to be a meat cleaver in her right hand. Right?
And it's a heck of a meat cleaver.
It's a big knife.
It looks
it's a
pretty.
big blade.
It looks pretty serious, and she's pretty excited right at the beginning. I think she escalates the situation, but as soon as he sees that really substantial knife, he gets excited, and he does probably what any police officer would do, right? And you can't blame the officer for this because he's mere feet away from her at this point. She's holding a pretty serious knife, which could be used as a weapon, and as any self-defense person will tell you, this could turn into a very bad situation. She's excited, she's angry, she starts yelling and screaming, and she starts saying that she's accusing, or at least alleging, that he may not be a real police officer. I don't buy this, right? The guy's in full uniform, and so I'm not really very convinced that
she's being uncooperative is basically your takeaway.
I think so. That's what's going on here. So the officer, I think with justification, pulls out his firearm and tells her, look, put down the knife. Now, of course, he says put down the gun a few times.
So here's where I'm going to disagree with you if you think that this part is justified. So if you watch the video carefully, I mean, the devil's in the details in these things, what the commands are. First, he says, put down the knife.
Right.
Okay, he says put down the knife. Because guess what? It's not a crime to answer your door with a knife in your hand. She could have been chopping carrots in the kitchen, and she walked over to the door and answered the door. So no crime, no problem whatsoever. Now, this is the tricky part. Well, this is the tricky part, because at that point, I don't think that you should be able to pull out your firearm. It's when she disobeys the command and is yelling and everything like that. That's when it's arguably justified.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And I think if you look at the official video put out by the sheriff's department, they automatically assume this is an aggravated assault. I don't agree with that either. But on the other hand, if she had just answered the door and she was holding this knife and she was very calm, hi, officer, how are you? What can I do? I've been chopping carrots or something. I think he overreacts by pulling out the gun and start pointing at her. But she gets excited pretty quick. And I think he doesn't know what he's dealing with, and he's got a right to defend himself. I think people who do self-defense for a living are going to say, look, given the very short distance between the two, maybe he's justified here, maybe he's not, but I don't think it's unreasonable. That's the big point.
I think it's unreasonable, and here's why I think it's completely unreasonable. He was there in order to serve the papers. He needed to serve the papers. We're both in agreement that the conduct that she does, even though she's excited, does not amount to aggravated assault. And right. I don't think a reasonable officer can find that somebody who's upset about being served with an eviction notice, but the person having the cleaver at the low and not shaking it, not swinging it, not threatening with it or anything like that, that's not going to be enough for aggravated assault or even misdemeanor assault at that point.
I agree with that.
Arguably, rather than pulling out the gun, I think the best course of action for the police officer would have been to have backed up at that point.
Maybe.
He did not. He stood his ground, right? As if he had the legal right to stand his ground, which maybe he did. But what he should have done, there's a big difference, as we always tell our clients, between what you're legally allowed to do and what you should do in a situation.
Yeah, and that's what I was. Look, he could have done it, and I think people are going to criticize the actions of the officer here throughout the whole video. but say they could have done this, they could have done that. But on the other hand, look, these things happen very quickly, and I think you got to be reasonable in your expectations. And a woman answers the door with a pretty serious-looking cleaver knife, and she's very excited and yelling and screaming. I think you got to give the guy an option to say, look, put the knife down.
You definitely have that.
Yeah.
But what I disagree with is immediate deadly force when he pulls that out. I'm always a little disturbed when an officer goes straight for the deadly force rather than less deadly. So my next question was, does he have a taser on him? Does he have something else that he could have taken out and put at the low ready rather than the deadly force?
Maybe, but this is really, to me, this is a bit of nitpicking here. This is, I don't say this is a bad officer because she answers the door, she gets excited pretty quick, she's got a knife, she refuses to put it down. And I think we're probably merge at the point that he says, look, put it down, and she refuses to put it down and starts yelling and screaming.
So let's talk about that. That's a really, really important point here, just so everybody knows what the law is on this point. And this is something, whether you agree with it or not, this is something that Mark and I have been arguing against in court for a long time, but it happens to be the state of the law in every state in the union, and here's what it is. You do not have the right to disobey the police officer's order while he is in the scope of his duties. So this is in the scope of his duties, whether legally justified or not. Now, if he gave you an unlawful order, then later on your remedy is not you get to disobey it in the moment and say screw you and then not obey it. That's not the legal remedy. The legal remedy is down the line. You can bring a civil rights action. You can say he unconstitutionally detained me, he gave me an unconstitutional command which interfered with my Fourth Amendment rights, and so on. So that's an important point.
It is an important point, but the law is the way the law is right now. And the officer says put it down, you better put it down. And again, This is not the place to argue that legal point. If she was looking to get shot, she probably did everything that she could have done to make this happen. And ultimately, I think that's where we're going to conclude at this point. So she slams the door on the guy. He says, well, she barricaded herself in. All right, I don't know if she barricaded herself in. And, the police video now assumes that she's committed an aggravated assault. On this point, I think we're in agreement here that we disagree with the official statement of the police that this isn't an aggravated assault.
Totally disagree.
It might be a risky situation for the officer, but she didn't seem to, if she had lifted that and pointed it in his face, I feel differently.
Yeah, important point, too. You can get charged with an aggravated assault. You don't have to actually make physical contact with the knife. If you're threatening somebody with the knife such that it puts them in imminent fear of deadly physical harm, for example, that can still be an assault under California law.
So now you get the everybody's arriving now, right? You get the police.
I don't even want to get to the arrival yet. There's some stuff I want to unpack there. So First of all, at worst at this point, what the cop has is evidence of a misdemeanor. He has evidence of the misdemeanor of failure to obey a police officer, which is a misdemeanor under California's penal code. Now, important point. Any law school will tell you after having taken their first year of criminal law that this is not generally considered enough for probable cause to enter a home. It is not enough just that you have probable cause of a misdemeanor offense to get the probable cause to enter that home. You generally need probable cause of a felony offense. Now, of course, the officer was alleging there was a felony here of an aggravated assault, but I disagree with this point.
As we said earlier, the department sort of brushes right over this by saying, oh, look, she's committing an aggravated assault. And I agree, this point is an important point, and I agree with you, this is not an aggravated assault, so he doesn't really have a right to barge in.
Well, there's another factor here, which is the statement by the maintenance.
That's where I was going next.
Go ahead.
So now everybody shows up, and they call either the maintenance guy or the manager or whoever, and they show up and say, hey, by the way, I just want to let you know, this same person just yesterday, in essence, committed an aggravated assault by threatening someone else with a knife.
2 days ago, I think.
2 days ago. I thought it was the day before, but it probably doesn't matter.
I think they said, quote, a couple of days ago this occurred.
And again, in the official version, right, they sort of assume, okay, well, now there's enough to arrest her. I'm not on board with that either.
Hell no. Yeah, I'm glad you're as skeptical as I am about it, because my first thought was, Did they independently corroborate this tip? Did they call the maintenance worker? If this person actually was assaulted with a knife, it seems like they would have called the police, filed a police report. Did they look into any of that stuff?
Could be an angry ex-boyfriend, somebody who doesn't like this lady. To me,
I don't know about you, Mark, but if I felt I was legitimately assaulted with a knife, then I would have maybe called the police, filed a report, done something a little bit more.
So again, we're a little critical of the official version here, right? Because they say, well, automatically you got enough to arrest. Not so sure about that. So now you got this whole group of people there, and they got the doggy there. They've got the beanbag. Now, first of all, let me make a good point here. I think I'm happy that they brought less lethal force to the table, right? Because I think these officers, and by the way, they knock on the door. They try to get her to come out. They say, hey, look, we got both departments here now, sort of to address this question about whether or not she's actually confused about whether there's an officer here. So I got to say, I think they're trying to de-escalate here. Now, maybe they could have done more.
My previous critique about the officer going too quickly to the deadly physical force was not present when they did the group kind of raid of the house.
Yeah, and so I think now they got the supervisor is there, and I think they're trying
to cooled down a little bit. They're strategizing.
So, okay, but now they get a key. And so they're going to enter. This gives us problems, right? Because now you're entering someone's apartment. Where's your warrant? You don't have a warrant. They're going to argue, well, we had some imminency here. We had a threat to public safety. Maybe I go with this. Maybe I not. Because, you think about the critiques that would have occurred on the other hand, right? So they say, okay, well, we can't enter. We're going to go get a warrant. In the meantime, she leaves and goes, and stabs and kills somebody. The critique is going to be, seriously, you weren't more aggressive at, here you got a lady yelling and screaming.
Well, there's a few answers to this. They can stake out the door and keep an eye on the door until they actually file an affidavit for a warrant.
There could be someone inside who's
get a judge to approve.
But there could be someone outside who's at risk, and they're going to be criticized. So
pure speculation. I don't think that's enough.
I'm speculating here, but we don't know, and I think they would be criticized if they probably went and sought a warrant. On the other hand, you can get these warrants pretty quick.
I think we're arriving at the same place here, is that they're entering without PC.
I think that's where we're at.
Yep.
I think we don't like
PC probable cause.
Probable cause. I think we don't like this entering of the apartment. I think there's less serious options. But again, these are 20/20 hindsight. To me, these are still kind of nitpicky things given the circumstance, because these are some close calls here, in my opinion. But they enter. And I'm happy that they brought the less lethal force with them. And they're also yelling out, hey, dog, drop the weapon. And they bring the doggy in. And at this point, I think it gets to be kind of an easy analysis, right?
Well, they fire off a couple of beanbags,
right,
which I believe actually hit her.
Yeah, and to be fair about this, they didn't have to fire the beanbags at this point. If she's coming down the hallway with a knife and she's aggressive and she's heading towards them, they could have used deadly force right at that point. But instead of doing that, they used the beanbags. These turn out to be ineffective. Now, this is a good case for using the firearm, right? Because exactly what happened here, an officer was stabbed by this woman, and it could have been far worse.
Right. This is the type of talking point we would have in doing a self-defense case. If we were representing somebody charged with a crime who had to use a firearm and discharge it, we would point out something like, well, there was an appropriate response to the force. They even did something maybe they didn't have to do by using non-deadly. And importantly, the non-deadly did not terminate the threat.
Yeah. And so they never get a chance to deploy the dog from what I can see. But there's a point I want to make here. Even if you grant they should have got a warrant, they shouldn't have entered the home, this doesn't really get you anywhere.
Nowhere, except in maybe a civil suit. So let's talk about that. If this was a crime, if she had survived and was charged with a crime, whenever the police enter your house or apartment or anywhere where you have a privacy interest, it's protected by the Fourth Amendment. And the idea here is if they enter without probable cause, then there's a punishment for that we've all agreed on as a society in your criminal case. And that punishment we agree on is something called suppression. That means if they find evidence that they're saying is evidence of your crime. So, for example, let's say that they entered her apartment without probable cause and they found a knife that was alleged to have been used in an aggravated assault. Well, if a judge agrees that was a bad search of the apartment or entrance into the apartment or warrantless and not supported by probable cause, the defense attorney down the line, had she survived and been charged with a crime, could have argued to exclude any evidence that was found inside of the apartment. But where it doesn't get you is it doesn't allow you to say, okay, if the police enter your house without probable cause, you now get to defend your house to the death with something like a knife. There's no provision that entitles you to do that, for better or for worse.
We would have loved to have brought that suppression motion, right? This thing ends differently. She survives. They find the offending knife, maybe with some drugs and some stolen property or who knows what. She gets charged. We would definitely have brought a motion to suppress it.
Would have been all over it.
Yeah, we would have, and we may have even won that, and those items would have been suppressed. But this is sort of a red herring in the analysis here.
Well, I mean, it also could be relevant here because let's say that her family, her surviving family members decide to bring a civil suit for a wrongful death or something like that. Those lawyers are going to be having a little bit of a different analysis. They're going to be looking in terms of, was this avoidable? You know, should they have had better training and things like that?
Tough case here.
It's definitely.
Tough case. Not one we would take because at the end of the day, you got her charged. And this is really dumb, in my opinion. I don't know if she was on drugs or she just had a death wish, but this is a good reason not to charge at police officers with a knife because if you do that, even the civil rights attorney who commented on the case called it a justified shooting.
Right.
I think that's pretty clear in this case.
Right. Well, there is a little fact that I would tweak in there that I think would make it a more appealing civil rights case for us to take for a wrongful death. If it was known to the officers or if they should have known that there were mental health issues at play here. So this is a big part here that I think the public is interested in is, was this woman, did she have mental health issues? It sounds, if you listen to the video while she's screaming and carrying on and you look at some of her actions in the case, it looks like maybe there's some evidence here that there might be some mental health issues. And departments have certain training how to deal with suspects with mental health issues. And maybe the critique is that they weren't deployed as much as they should have been in a case like this.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point. It doesn't get me that far. Even if she has mental health issues, if you've got mental health issues and you're charging at a police officer with a knife, at the end of the day, they're still going to get to shoot you.
Right. The critique is going to be that they, before putting them in a situation where they were squaring off with a mental health patient with a knife in her hand, they should have deployed somebody like a negotiator or something like that.
And so I think ultimately that's how I come out on this thing. Could the police officers, looking back at it now with 20/20 hindsight, where we can look at the video and go frame by frame and look at it very carefully, could they have done something better to de-escalate this situation? Maybe they could have. Do we hold them to that standard? Is it reasonable to hold them to what I would say a standard of perfection? I think that's a little unreasonable. So I got to say, look, overall, I really can't fault the police. A few things like we talked about, I think we could tweak here and there. But at the end of the day, these aren't cops I'm going to call bad guys. I'm going to say these are cops trying to do the best they can. I think this police officer was probably having a pretty nice day. And you notice at the beginning of the video, he says hello to somebody. He seems pretty friendly at the beginning. This thing escalates really fast. In fact, you hear him, put down the gun, and he means knife, right? The guy's obviously freaked out.
Right.
He could be a second or two away from being dead here. So we can't expect perfection. I think at the end of the day, there are far bigger fights for us to pick with actions of police officers. And again, we try to be even-handed, right? Mm-hmm. And so there are many cases where we side with the civilian over the police officer, and there are cases where we side with the officer over the civilian.
That's absolutely right. We defend, we call balls and strikes. We've defended people who have been accused of assaulting officers. We've defended officers who've been accused of assaulting civilians. We sue bad cops, and we also defend them publicly when we see a good shoot like this.
That's right.
And this was definitely a good shoot, legally speaking. That being said, it's still very important to talk about these things because even in a good shoot, there's always ways that police departments can improve in training and things like that. So I'm really glad that's the focus of the public conversation about the
Yeah, but at the end of the day, I think that, they tried to use less lethal force here. I'm not going to fault them too much, even if they could have done something better. Again, like I like to say it is, we are very pro-good cop and very anti-bad cop. I think at the end of the day here, you can't fault the police too much for what happened. It's still a sad, tragic situation.
Horribly tragic.
No
but,
question.
There's lots of lessons to be learned from it, and I think we pretty much end up on the same place of our analysis.
Yep, that's our take.
All right, guys, thanks a lot for tuning in. Check out attorneysforfreedom.com. This has been attorney Andy Marcantel and attorney Mark J. Victor. Peace.